Hello everyone, today we're going to be looking at generating random numbers in general, but also more specifically in Java. Now, the first thing that's important to talk about is what random means. And random means essentially that you're trying to create a set of numbers that don't have a pattern that can be predicted. And that comes in handy when you're trying to simulate something, or when you're trying to create, let's say, a game and you want the characters in the game to behave in a random pattern. Nothing's worse than being able to find the pattern of an enemy going around and around and around and being able to predict what will happen. Sometimes you want that, but sometimes you want the behaviors to happen randomly. Now there's a bit of a problem in computers, in that computers are predictable devices. They operate on binary, ones and zeros, and so there really isn't a way to just randomly choose something. Instead, what programmers have done is they're able to generate a sequence of pseudo-random, which is kind of like random-like numbers. And these numbers appear to be random, but they're actually based on a seed. And a seed is a number that can predict the pattern of numbers coming after it. I'm trying to explain it in a simple way. And what that means is that there isn't a true random function in Java or in any programming language, but there is something that will be good enough, that will give you random numbers. As you get into programming, and you might sometimes want to take advantage of the fact that there's this seed, because what that means is that if I use the same number as the seed, I will always get the same sequence of numbers. And that might be really useful for testing, when you might want to test with the same sort of pseudo-random series of numbers. For now, though, we don't really need to worry about the seed. You just need to understand that it's random enough for our purposes. So in Java, looking more specifically at Java, the way that we're going to generate random numbers is by accessing a class. And remember, we talked about how a class was a blueprint, and when you wanted to do math stuff, there was a math class with useful math things. When you wanted to do something with strings, there was a string class with useful things that you could do with strings. Well, guess what? There's a random class. And the random class is going to have useful things that you might want to do with random stuff. And it's pretty straightforward, this class. It has a bunch of next methods, and those next methods are going to allow you to generate randomly different things. Booleans, bytes, integers, doubles, all that kind of wonderful stuff. Most of these behave the way that you would expect it. So for integer, for example, I'm going to give it a number, and it is going to give me that many different possibilities. So if I put in 12, it is going to generate a random number with 12 different possibilities. Keep in mind, though, that just like the string, it is going to start generating those numbers at 0, which means that if I put a 12 in there, it is going to generate a random number between 0 and 11. So that's the first gotcha, is to remember that the number you put in there is really just talking about the different number of possibilities, the number of possible numbers that could be generated. The second gotcha is that with things like doubles and floats, it's not going to generate any random number. It's going to generate a random number between 0 and 0.999999999. And what that means is that if you want to generate a true random decimal number that has, things both to the left and to the right of the decimal place, you're going to have to do some manipulation, some coding with that. Multiplication, adding, division, something like that in order to get the result that you're looking for. The other thing it means is that when you say next double, it will literally generate a double as big as it can make it, or as small as it could make it, with as many decimal places as it can. And that may mean that you're going to have to do some math to constrain it to the number of decimal places you're looking for a random number. So there's a few gotchas that you need to maybe pay attention to. A couple of hints before I give you an example. So random generator is kind of like the scanner that we talked about. You're going to create it once, and you can use it as many times in your program. Some people will create it once per method and then use it within the method however it is that you want. You can call it to grab integers, then you could call it to grab booleans and doubles. It's just a generator. Its job there is to literally sit there and wait for you to ask it to generate some sort of a number, and it will happily go about doing that. Here's an example. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because we're going to actually write some code in a second, but the key is this line here, and this line is going to generate a random number between 0 and 9. No decimals because it's an integer. 0 and 9. Okay, we'll get into a real example in a second. So I've already talked a little bit about some random notes, so we're going to pause right now as I jump into NetBeans. Alrighty, so now you can see we are in NetBeans. I have a program all set up, and the first thing I'm going to want to do is create my random number generator. And let's just close it off here. Oops, perfect. Now you're going to see that everything is happy right now. I actually made a mistake when I set this up. So it's actually worth noting, this is a good point to talk about that, is you'll notice that I called my my class random. And over here, I'm using that same thing. Java will allow you to do that, but it's always going to try to grab, it's always going to look at the closest context first. And that's why I usually try to not generate classes that are also the names of Java classes. So what I would have to do here if I wanted to access really the real one is I would have to specify where it is it's coming from. And this will tell me that no, it's not the random here that I want, it's actually the random from the utility. And then over here I would say so that's a good point. I didn't intend to do that, but it's a good learning moment for all of us. Do you remember how I talked about a seed earlier? Well, you can see I can create a random number with nothing in it, or I could create a random number with a number in there. So that generator, I could put a number in there and that would form a seed. In this case, I said we're not going to worry about seeds, so we're going to just go like that. Now remember, in your program, you're not going to have to say java.util. Because you're not going to make the same mistake that I did, because you know. So now that you've got that generator, you can just start generating numbers. So int first is equal to generator dot, and I'm going to generate a number. What if I wanted to generate the roll of a dice? So my thinking process whenever I use the random number generator, because it gets a little confusing, is the first thing I do is I think about how many different possibilities are there when I roll a single die. And the answer is 6. So that's what I'm going to put inside here, is the number of 6. That's the number of possibilities. The problem is it's not right because it's going to give me numbers between 0 and 5. But it's still got 6 possibilities, so I'm not going to touch this. This is doing what I want it to do. But what I'm going to have to do is potentially shift or change the result to give the desired result. And in this case, for a die, it's pretty easy. I can just add 1 to it, and it's now going to generate a random number from 0 to 5, from 1 to 6. Okay. Same example I can give you for a double, so let's make the second is equal to generator, and voila, now we have that. And if we wanted to, we could go ahead and print those out. Let's throw a space between them just so you can see, and I should have, oops, errors, unreachable code. Oh no. Oh, first of all, I don't want to have this in here. That's from something else. Perfect. And so then when I go ahead and run it, I will see the results, which is a random number here and then a random decimal generated over there. So the use of random, or rather the calling of it, is pretty easy. Right? Next int, next double. But it actually can get really difficult to use in practice. So for example, if you were asked to generate a random number between 2 and 3 with exactly 3 decimal places, now you have to start mathing the problem. And I mean, there's many ways to do it, and it depends on, is it inclusive of 2, is it exclusive, is it inclusive of 3, exclusive. So there's all those types of nuances, but there are some of the ways of doing it are, for example, here you could think of how many decimal places there are, and you could imagine a number without the decimal places and generate an integer. So 2 with 3 decimal places, that means it's kind of a random number between 2,000 and 3,000, and I can do that. I could generate a random number and I could add 2,000 to it, or perhaps 2001, again, it kind of, right? And then what I could do afterwards is I could divide it by 1,000, and dividing it by 1,000 is going to generate those decimal places from the number. So that's one potential way for me to be able to generate that random number. You'll notice that I put a .0 in there. And you'll recall from a previous lesson that we talked about integer division. If I didn't do that here, this would treat this whole problem as an integer division problem, which would not give you any decimal places. That would be a bit of a problem. Another way of doing it would be the double way. So I could just generate a next double, which will give me a bunch of precision between 0 and 1. I could add 2 to it, which would shift that whole problem between 2 and 2.9999. And then you could use one of the techniques that I talked about in the other video to then take that very, very precise number and round it down. And that's just a few of the kind of mathematical trickeries that you could come across. And sometimes the problem is even just thinking. And I want you guys to think about a couple of these problems and throw in the comments, please, your thoughts on how you would do it. But here, for example, what would you do if you wanted to generate the roll of 2 dice? And what makes this tricky is that there's many ways of doing it, but not all of them are correct. Not all of them will correctly simulate the rolling of 2 dice. So please think about it and toss into the comments how you think that problem might be solved. The other question might be looking at negatives now. So generating a random number goes from 0 to something. Well, what if I want a range between -3 and 2? And again, if you kind of followed my suggestions of thinking about how many random numbers, how many random things do you want generated, and that's what you're going to start with, and then you can do whatever shifting you want. The last problem I want to bring up is generating specific random numbers. So let's say if I wanted to generate numbers from a list, let's say I wanted to generate one of these random numbers. There's no way to directly do that in Java. I can generate a random number between 1 and 2, 1 and 4, but I can't choose 13 or 24 or 35 or 46. And if you ever get a problem like that, you need to kind of just flip your thinking a little bit and think about it instead as a problem of I need to choose one of 4 different possibilities. That's what it's asking you to do. I want to choose one of 4 different possibilities, which means how many random numbers do I want to generate? Well, it's going to be, it's actually put, 4. It's going to be 4 different possibilities. Then I'm going to take each possibility, and perhaps using some sort of a decision structure, I could say, well, if I generated this, choose 13. If I generated this, choose 24, and so on. That would be one possible way of solving it. Now, there's a couple of others, but that's kind of a general start for beginner programmers. I hope this lesson wasn't too random and that it actually helped you understand how randomness is used in programming. If you have any questions or comments, throw it into the comments, please. Or if you're part of my class, add it to our chat. Take care.